Hello and welcome to another episode of Never Mind the Dam Busters with me, James Jeffries, and as ever I am joined by my co-host, Jane Gulliford-Lowes. Today we are starting something of a run of episodes devoted to winners of the Victoria Cross, VC, medal, which will be released occasionally throughout the current series of the pod. In these VC episodes, we will be profiling and telling the stories of the Victoria Cross winners in RAF Bomber Command, but also those who flew bombers in other theatres during the war or to units affiliated to RAF Bomber Command, who were also awarded the VC. Today, we'll be focusing on the award being given to two individuals, Sergeant Thomas Gray and Flying Officer Donald Garland, who served in the Advanced Air Striking Force, or AASF. And though the AASF were not strictly part of RAF Bomber Command, the squadrons from one group, Bomber Command, were diverted to be a part of it. We'll also discuss other aircrews and individuals, including leading air craftsman, LAC, Lawrence Reynolds, who flew in the same ferry battle on the same operation as Garland and Gray, yet Reynolds himself was overlooked for any award. So, Jane, do you want to tell us a little about the Victoria Cross?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. So the Victoria Cross is the highest and most prestigious decoration for valour in the presence of the enemy, awarded to members of the British Armed Forces. Instituted on the 29th of January 1856 for personnel honoured for their gallantry in the Crimean War, it is awarded for, and I quote, most conspicuous bravery, or some daring or pre-eminent act of valour, or self-sacrifice, or extreme devotion to duty in the presence of the enemy. In total, there have been 1,358 Victoria Crosses awarded, and the very first one was awarded on 26th of June 1857 to Rear Admiral Charles Lucas. The most recent was 26th of February 2015, paratrooper Joshua Leakey, who was serving in Afghanistan. 181 VCs were awarded during the Second World War, with 23 being awarded to RAF personnel in RAF Bomber Command or flying bombers. These gallantry awards will be the focus in this series of podcast episodes.
It's now that we focus our attention on Thomas Gray and Donald Garland. Thomas Gray was born in Urchford in Wiltshire on the 17th of May 1914. He was the fourth born of 7 brothers and one of 5 to join the RAF. Thomas was enlisted on the 27th of August 1929 and trained to be a fitter, which was the title given to ground crew that specialised on aircraft engines. He was first posted to 40 Squadron, and though he was not aircrew, ground crew could apply for part-time flying duties as air gunners. There were no official, so to speak, air gunners at this time, and the role would be filled by ground staff who volunteered for the extra duty. Gray jumped at the chance to be a gunner as it involved extra pay on top of the excitement of being in an aircraft and flying in them. Soon he gained his Air Sleeve badge and in 1933 was promoted to leading aircraftsman, LAC, and joined 58 Squadron and then 12 Squadron, where he met Donald Garland.
So Donald Garland was born on the 28th of June 1918 at Ballincourt, County Wicklow in Ireland, though he grew up and went to school in London. He first worked as a clerk in the office of an insurance company, but Donald soon applied to join the RAF, and in June 1937 he was accepted for a short commission and flying training. He graduated as a pilot on the 7th of May 1938 and was posted to 12 Squadron, where he picked up the name Judy. Obviously, what else? At the time, 12 Squadron, nicknamed the Dirty Dozen or Shining 12, was converting from Hawker Hind biplane bombers to the Fairey Battle. The Battle was a vast improvement on the Hind, and with its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same that powered the RAF's fastest aircraft, the Hawker Hurricane and Supermarine Spitfire fighters. Like the Hurricane and Spitfire, the Bat was a monoplane with retractable undercarriage and an enclosed cockpit, unlike the Hind. The Battle seemed an exciting prospect and an upgrade to the open cockpit biplane bombers it replaced. It could fly to top speed of 257 miles per hour compared to the top speed of the Hind, which was only 186 miles per hour. However, the Battle was over 100 miles per hour slower than the Spitfire and would be weighed down with bombs and the combined weight of 3 crew members, lowering its speed further. The crew of a Battle included a pilot, wireless operator, or radio operator to modern ears, who also acted as gunner, and an observer who would act as a navigator and a bomb aimer. The battle had a 1,000-pound bomb load capacity, which is about 454 kilograms, with the bombs located in racks in the wings of the aircraft. But it could also carry reconnaissance flares and was armed with 2 machine guns, a fixed .303 Browning machine gun mounted in the starboard wing pointing forwards, used by the pilot, and a .303 Vickers K machine gun used by the observer in the rear part of the cockpit, pointing backwards to protect the aircraft from enemy aircraft attacking the rear.
In August 1939, 12 Squadron learned that it would be moved to France should Britain and France go to war with Germany, which was looking ever more likely. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939 and war came, the AASF moved to France straight away and prepared for war. The AASF would comprise not only 10 ferry battle squadrons of one group RAF Bomber Command, but also 2 squadrons of Hawker Hurricane fighters of RAF Fighter Command. Aircraft from 2 Group Bomber Command, consisting of Bristol Blenheim bombers, joined the AASF in France from December 1940, with 4 more Blenheim squadrons joining in May 1940. 2 of these Blenheim squadrons would replace 2 battle squadrons, meaning that there would be 8 battle squadrons in France as part of the AASF in the spring of 1940. The AASF was commanded by Air Chief Marshal Arthur Barrett, who was nicknamed Ugly. Alongside the AASF would be the air component of the British Expeditionary Force, or BEF, consisting of further Hawker Hurricanes and other types of aircraft. But the AASF were not answerable to the BEF like the air component were. The AASF would undertake reconnaissance missions and be expected to bomb the German factories in the Ruhr, but could also be used to attack ground forces in any German invasion of France or the Low Countries. Alongside the RAF would be the French Air Force.
12 Squadron were to be stationed at an airfield in Berry-au-Bac, just north of the AASF headquarters at Reims, and flew their first sortie on 17th of September, making reconnaissance sorties of the French and German borders. News soon reached 12 Squadron that a flight of 3 ferry battles had been involved in a dogfight with German fighters over Aachen in Germany on the 20th of September. Though 2 battles were shot down, the third claimed a 109 destroyed, but Luftwaffe accounts do not list a 109 as missing. A battle, though, did shoot down the RAF's first Luftwaffe aircraft, a Messerschmitt 109D, on the 27th of September. It was shot down by leading aircraftsman Summers of 103 Squadron whilst on a patrol, who was actually taking photographs of German ground defences on the Siegfried Line. Summers was later awarded a Distinguished Flying Medal, DFM, for this action.
Other engagements, though, showed the vulnerability of the battle against German fighters. 2 88 Squadron battles were shot down on patrol on the 20th of September. On the 28th of September, 32 battles were dispatched, with 13 being lost and the others all returning badly damaged after engaging Luftwaffe fighters. On the 30th of September, 4 out of 5 battles were shot down, with the 5th being left beyond repair. This resulted in battles now being ordered not to fly unescorted missions. Charles Gardner, a military press correspondent, spoke with a number of battle aircrew that were concerned about the vulnerability of the battle from being attacked from underneath, and others worried about the slow speed of the aircraft, but many crews still felt confident in the aircraft should the Germans attack. There were attempts to add a gun underneath the battle for the observer to use, but this proved not to be a success and was dropped. There were also attempts to fit armour plating underneath, but this proved to make the aircraft slower and even more easier for enemy ground fire or fighters to shoot them down.
Now, the air crews of 12 Squadron anticipated that they'd soon be in action, but no German offensive came, and with the deteriorating weather, the period of the Phoney War set in. A few more reconnaissance sorties over the French and German borders took place when the weather cleared, and there were visits from notable people, including a Christmas visit from King George VI on 8th of December, wearing his full RAF uniform. In March, the weather started to improve, and some battles were sent on nickel raids, which involved dropping leaflets over Germany, and these helped to alleviate the boredom that had started to set in within the battle squadrons. Flying training started again, and the crews practiced bombing and attacking ground targets. They also conducted night flying training and made the most of any extra leave, enjoying the sights and sounds of France. This routine, though, was to dramatically change in May 1940. Now, after the German invasion of Denmark and Norway in April 1940, the German armed forces launched an invasion of the Low Countries on the 10th of May. Ugly Barrett had received warning the night before of a potential attack, but this was nothing too unusual as there had been a few false alarms before, so no immediate action was taken. As reports came in on the 10th itself, there was some confusion, and the battles, though ordered to attack German troop movements 10 times, were not put into action until midday. The AASF airfields were bombed by the Luftwaffe, but only 3 battles in total for the AASF were lost on the ground.
12 Squadron were among the battles to go into action on the 10th to attack German troop movements. Flying in this attack was Flight Lieutenant William Simpson. Simpson wrote of his experiences of flying his battle into combat. We flew down a wooded alley, and on coming over the rise at the far end, we caught our first glimpse of the target. The enemy column had halted. At its head were mule-drawn vehicles. Spread away behind were all kinds of other vehicles. Many more must have been hidden where the road ran back into the wood. Things were happening quickly. We opened up our bomb doors and got ready to release the bombs and drop the bombs on the leaders. They went off in a stick, one after the other. All of this time, Tomlinson, the gunner, was standing up in the back taking photographs, turning violently from one side to the other in an attempt to escape from the heavy fire that was spraying us. I saw 4 puffs of grey-white smoke drifting downward lazily from the bombed vehicles. It was then that I noticed for the first time that we had been hit. The cockpit was full of petrol fumes, and I was sticky with escaping glycol. I opened the hood of the cockpit to allow the fumes to escape. Suddenly there was a heavy thud. Flames were starting to pour from a great jagged hole on the left side of the engine. Lumps of molten metal shot past my head. Miraculously, my Rolls-Royce Merlin continued to turn. I opened the throttle wide and just managed to keep flying at about 100 feet above the ground. We must have hit mainly by light flak, well concealed in the woods. The column had obviously been expecting attack from the air. Certainly it was well prepared when we arrived. If only we could have attacked with a much stronger force.
Now, Simpson was forced to crash land but was badly burned and hospitalised. Tomlinson was also burned in this action. Simpson was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions, and Tomlinson, his wireless operator, and Odell, his observer, a Distinguished Flying Medal each. Simpson was eventually taken prisoner but was repatriated in late 1941 via Spain and became a member of the Guinea Pig Club. The club was formed in July 1941 for burns victims, many of whom had received reconstructive plastic surgery and were under the care of Sir Archibald McIndoe. The club would challenge the perceptions of disabilities as being life-limiting, and it would eventually have 649 members and help burned airmen achieve full and active lives.
12 Squadron had sent out 4 battles in the attack Simpson had been involved with. One other battle was lost in the attack, with another being forced to land at a different airfield. A third returned to base with a wounded crew member. In total of the 32 RAF AASF bombers that went into action that day, 13 had been lost, with the rest all suffering some form of damage. A further 8 battles were lost on the 11th of May in a similar attack, though none were lost by 12 Squadron. The RAF and the French Air Force were also suffering heavy losses on the air and on the ground. The Belgian Air Force, who also operated ferry battles, had suffered huge losses in the first 2 days, and the Dutch Air Force had been virtually obliterated on the ground. The Luftwaffe seemed unstoppable. As the sun set on the 11th, it was uncertain how things would play out so far. It had been a stark start to the offensive in the west.
So the next morning, the crews of 12 Squadron, including Gray and Garland, were called to an emergency briefing. As they listened in, they were told that the Germans had captured several bridges over the Albert Canal, and 12 Squadron would be sent in to destroy 2 bridges at Vrouwenhoven and Veldgezelt. These were by no means small targets, with the bridges being 379 feet long and 30 feet wide and made from steel. The Belgian army had planned to blow up the bridges before the German troops arrived, but they'd been overrun by the speed of the German advance before they could do so. It was then that the decision was made to send in the AASF to stem the advance, and 12 Squadron was selected. The sortie was expected to be highly dangerous, and volunteers were called for to take part. By then, the crews of 12 Squadron were very much aware of the losses suffered in the last few days and the vulnerability of the battle to air attack and ground fire. Every member of the aircrew of 12 Squadron put their name forward, though, to take part in the attack. In the end, the names of 6 pilots were drawn from a hat, and Garland's name was picked as one of the 6. The 6 battles were divided into 2 sections of 3 aircraft. Garland would lead one section that would attack the Veldkvezel Bridge, and Flying Officer Norman Thomas, who led the other flight, would lead the flight attacking the Vloenhoven Bridge. Garland would fly his battle with Gray as his observer, along with leading aircraftsman Lawrence Reynolds as his wireless operator and gunner. Thomas called for an attack from high altitude. Garland, though, was not convinced, believing a low-level attack was a better option, and soon a heated discussion began about the plan of attack. In the end, it was decided that Thomas would lead his flight at high altitude, and Garland would lead his at low level. Before the crews began boarding their battles, Thomas's last remarks to Gray on the topic was, "It will be interesting to see the result, and may we both be lucky enough to return."
The first battle took off at 0818. One of the aircraft, though, to be flown by Pilot Officer Brereton, failed to take off due to a faulty wireless set. This was replaced, but it was then found that the hydraulics for the bomb release system were also faulty. By then it was too late. Brereton would have to sit out of the sortie, as the 5 other battles were now on their way to the target. Ahead of the battles flew Hurricanes from 1 squadron. These were led by Commanding Officer Squadron Leader Bull Hallahan. The Hurricanes were instructed to reach the target area and then to attack any Luftwaffe fighters they saw that might threaten the battles of 12 Squadron. Near the area, though, they were bounced on by Messerschmitt 109s of JG-27 at 9:15 a.m. The 109s outnumbered the Hurricanes by 10-1, but the Hurricanes did all they could to distract the 109s. Hallahan was soon shot down and bowed out, but he had attacked 2 German fighters beforehand. As he parachuted down to the ground, he watched his Hurricanes of 1 squadron dogfighting with the German fighters of JG-27. Another Hurricane was shot down, but that pilot also bowed out. 2 more returned damage, with another making a forced landing. The action, though, had meant that the fighter escort for the battles was not present when they arrived to bomb the bridges, and the German fighters and ground defences had been awoken for the arrival of 12 Squadron shortly after the dogfighting with 1 squadron had ended.
So, as 12 Squadron approached the bridges, the area was covered in 7/10 cloud, and the first flight, led by Thomas, met some of the Messerschmitt fighters which had been in combat with 1 squadron. The German fighters swooped into the attack and started firing on the first flight of battles. Thomas and another battle, flown by Pilot Officer Davy, were just at the target as this happened, and so pushed the control columns of their aircraft forward into a dive of 6,000 feet. As they did so, they met heavy fire from the ground defences near the bridges. The fire from the ground was made up of flak and small arms weapons such as machine guns. As the bullets flew through the diving battles and flak exploded all around them, Thomas and his flight managed to drop their bombs near the bridges and cause some damage, but as Thomas himself flew up from the dive, his aircraft lost speed, and a 109 riddled his aircraft with bullets. Thomas's aircraft then spouted flames, but Thomas managed to crash land his aircraft not far from the bridges and around 150 yards from the German convoy, where he and his crew were soon taken prisoner by nearby German troops. Davy's battle too was shot up by a 109, and soon the petrol tank on the port side wing of his battle began to burn violently and brightly. Turning the burning battle towards Allied lines, Davy ordered his observer and wireless operator to bail out as they flew over an area northeast of Maastricht. The aircraft's observer, Sergeant Mansell, would bail out and return to 12 Squadron later, but the wireless operator, leading aircraftsman Patterson, a Canadian, hit his ankle on the tail of the battle as he fell out of the aircraft. When he landed on the ground, he found he was near a Belgian hospital at Saint-Germain-les-Monts. He was not there long, though. The hospital was overrun by German troops, and Patterson became a prisoner of war. Davy flew the burning battle alone as it disappeared into the horizon. Otto Savalisch of JG-27 claimed a battle shot down at 10:35 a.m., which was likely Thomas's aircraft.
After the first flight had attacked, it was now Garland's moment, and his flight approached their target. Flying low had meant that they had avoided the German fighters, but they were now easy prey for the German ground guns, who had been made aware of the attack by the previous flight of 12 Squadron battles. Gray lay on the floor of the battle and gazed through the bomb sight. Ahead lay the bridges covered in smoke and craters from the previous attack that had appeared to cause significant damage to the area and to the bridges themselves. At this point, Garland radioed his wingman to set the bomb fuses for an 11-second delay. As the bridge approached, Gray pressed the bomb release gear button and saw the first bomb hit the water by the bridge. The other bombs hit the bridge, and there were violent explosions below. But before the battle could return to base, it was hit and burst into flames. Garland attempted to control the battle, but it was too late. It plummeted to the ground and was soon a smouldering wreck with all 3 crew members dead inside.
The second battle, following behind, flown by Pilot Officer McIntosh, was about to start its bombing run when the battle's petrol tank was hit and the aircraft erupted into flames. McIntosh, seeing the damage, ordered the bombs to be jettisoned and somehow managed to make a forced landing. He and his crew were soon taken prisoner by German troops on the ground. They were interrogated by a perplexed German officer who told them, "You British are mad. We captured the bridge early Friday morning. You give us all Friday and Saturday to get our flak guns up in circles all around the bridge, and then on Sunday, when all is ready, you come along with 3 aircraft and try to blow the bridge up." McIntosh and his crew boarded a lorry to be taken away, and noted that they crossed a different bridge to the one that had been attacked. McIntosh then thought to himself that the attack must have been a success if they were now not crossing their target bridge. He and his crew would spend the rest of the war as POWs.
The third battle, flown by Sergeant Marland, had approached alongside Garland's battle. As it approached, the aircraft was riddled with bullets and shrapnel from ground fire. The battle still managed to release its bombs on target and started to pull away to safety. The aircraft then lost power as it stalled and turned a semicircle, almost pausing in the sky at about 100 feet, before it then plunged face down towards the fields below. The aircraft crashed violently into a field and within moments was a burning wreck of twisted metal. Neither Marland nor his 2 crewmen, Sergeant Footner or LAC Perrin, survived.
At 11 a.m, Davy's battle landed at a French Air Force airfield at Saint-Germain-Mont. The ground crews and other pilots of 12th Squadron at Amifontaine waited anxiously for news. They soon found out that none of their squadron had returned back to base after the morning attack on the bridges. Davy's battle was the only aircraft that had survived, and he had landed elsewhere, badly damaged. Davy provided what little information he could. Otherwise, the intelligence suggested that some bombs had been dropped, but the status of the bridges targeted in the attack was unclear. As it turned out, the German engineers had quickly built pontoon bridges, and the German troops were now streaming over the river as if nothing had happened. Veldwesel Bridge had been partly shattered and broken, and later analysis determined that the damage had been made by Garland's battle. The attack on the bridges did not halt the German advance, nor was it the last tragedy for the AASF. Attacks continued, and estimates suggest that AASF numbers had fallen from 135 to 72 aircraft by the 14th of May. This had meant the force had essentially been halved in just under 72 hours.
The need to stop the German advance was still apparent, and on the 14th of May, there was a mass final attempt to attack the area of Sedan, where the Germans were crossing the River Meuse in great numbers. The British and French initially thought that the main German attack was taking place in the Low Countries, and that the events which unfolded in the wooded Ardennes area was a diversionary attack. It was soon realised, though, that this wasn't the case. The urgent need to put an all-out effort on the Sedan area to stop the German advance was quickly recognised. Once again, the battle crews, or what was left of them, were asked to volunteer, and once again, they all did so.
Now, the first attack on the 14th went well. 6 battles from 115 Squadron and 4 from 150 Squadron attacked targets in the Sedan area. A fighter escort was also provided. The battles met heavy fire from the ground, but suffered no losses, and, except for 2 battles that had failed to find their target, they had attacked German troop columns or hit bridges that the Germans were using to cross their troops into Allied lines. This attack had happened at 7:35 a.m, and the plan was to follow up with an even larger effort as soon as possible, and for there to be no delays. But it wasn't until 3 p.m, over 6.5 hours later, that the other RAF bombers launched their attack due to issues and confusion with communications.
63 battles took off along with 8 Blenheims, all that remained of the AASF. The Germans were now fully prepared for any attack from the air. They'd had plenty of time to set up defences and call in support from the Luftwaffe fighters. 39 of the 71 RAF bombers were shot down in the space of less than an hour. The countryside around Sedan was now littered with the burning wrecks of ferry battles and Blenheims. 71 RAF aircraft were lost in total on the 14th of May, along with most of their crews. On hearing the news, Ugly Barrett locked himself in his office after hanging up a Do Not Disturb sign on his door and could be heard weeping and then crying at the loss of so many of his men. The incident would become known as the Hell on the Meuse. There was little disruption to the German advance, which carried on unabated, though 3 bridges were damaged and 1 briefly put out of action by the attack. The Germans once again put up pontoon bridges, and the AASF had made another brave but futile effort at an incredibly high cost in aircraft and aircrew. The Luftwaffe meanwhile had, on the same day, bombed Rotterdam and forced the Netherlands to surrender.
The AASF battles had been absolutely decimated. The handful which remained were immediately switched to night duties only, where losses dramatically fell. The AASF was officially dissolved on the 26th of June. Total losses of battles is estimated, according to the official histories, at 137 aircraft. Other sources have suggested that perhaps over 200 were lost. Most were lost to ground fire and others to Luftwaffe fighters, and to Luftwaffe raids on airfields. Many others were destroyed by RAF ground crews to prevent them from falling into enemy hands during the confused mass exodus of Allied forces retreating from France. This further confuses the figures.
The ferry battle had proven too slow and too easy for the Germans to shoot down. Later in the war, it would prove a valuable training aircraft, and many future Bomber Command pilots trained in battles. It was also used as a target tug for trainee gunners. The aircraft proved solid and stable and was used as a test bed for new engine designs. The battle's legacy was solidified by the events of May 1940 and became the symbol of the unsuccessful air attacks against the German advance.
The crews had shown incredible courage and determination, which was recognised by many. Charles Gardner wrote in his diary after the first few opening days of the Battle of France that the work of the battle squadrons is beyond praise in my inadequacy of words. The courage of those boys, outnumbered, attacked by hordes of fighters, defended by only 2 tatty little guns, and in slow aeroplanes. They've been going at those German lines of supply the whole time. We don't get any details of casualties now, but I imagine that many more of our friends have gone.
Gallantry awards would be bestowed on many of the crews who took part on the 12th of May operation. There was a Distinguished Flying Cross awarded for Davy, and Patterson received the Distinguished Flying Medal. Davy later flew and fought in the Battle of Britain, flying fighters, but met his death in July 1941. The most significant awards, though, were the 2 Victoria Crosses for Garland and Gray. It was Garland who had led his section of battles into the attack, and his battle that had appeared to cause the most damage.
Garland and Gray's were the first Victoria Crosses awarded to members of the RAF during the Second World War. It was Garland and Gray who would represent the valour and efforts of the RAF light bomber aircrews who flew in similar operations during the Battle of France. The bodies of Gray, Garland and Reynolds were recovered by local Belgian civilians. All 3 were buried in a secret location, preventing the Germans from claiming them. There they stayed until the end of the war, when the location of their graves was disclosed to Allied officials in 1945. The bodies were disinterred and reburied at Lanaken Cemetery, though they did not rest there long. The 3 airmen were finally laid to rest at Haverly Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery, where they remain to this day.
It's here that we should mention the 3rd crew member, LAC Lawrence Reynolds, who was completely overlooked for his part in the action. It's been the subject of speculation for some time as to why he was overlooked for an award alongside Garland and Gray. Perhaps it was class snobbery or the result of mistakes made in paperwork. The official history summarised that Reynolds' name should be remembered alongside Garland and Gray's, and that he also represented the part-time aircrew of the early days of the war, the men who forsook the safety of the ground for the love of flying, and whose efforts were rewarded by the princely addition of a daily 18 pence to their pay. On Reynolds' gravestone are engraved an epitaph typical of those written on many other thousands of headstones belonging to aircrew. In proud and loving memory, always in our thoughts, Mother and Mary.
The tragedies for Garland's family did not end with the death of their son Donald. They also lost all 3 of Donald's brothers over the course of the war, all in RAF service. These were Pilot Officer Desmond Garland, who was killed piloting an Avro Manchester on the 5th of June 1942 with 50 Squadron, aged 27. Desmond's body was never found. The family's third loss was that of Flight Lieutenant John Garland, who died on the 28th of February 1943, aged 32, after falling ill with pulmonary tuberculosis. The final brother to be lost was Flight Lieutenant Patrick Garland, who was killed whilst landing a Spitfire on 1st of January 1945, aged 36. There was further tragedy too for the Gray family, who lost 2 of Thomas's 6 other brothers, who were all also in the RAF. Leading aircraftsman John Gray was lost in a training accident with the Empire Central Flying School at Hull Lavington, near Lancaster, on the 7th of September 1945, at the age of just 18. Pilot Officer Robert Gray was killed in a practice flight on 1st of July 1946, flying a Wellington bomber across the Irish Sea. Robert was due to be demobbed and return home to his wife the following week. He was aged just 24.
The first VCs of the war are a reminder that RAF Bomber Command story includes narratives often overlooked in films and popular memories of the conflict. The early actions are perhaps overshadowed by the fact that there were another 5 years of war to come, with further sacrifices and sufferings in an ever-escalating war. Add to this, official reports that berated the bombing accuracy of the earlier raids are post-war trauma and controversies surrounding Bomber Command, and they are then perhaps overshadowed further in the passage of time. Over the course of the conflict, aircraft grew larger and faster, with ever heavier bomb loads flying deeper into enemy territory and reaping ever-increasing destruction. In that time, there would be many more deaths in the air and of civilians on the ground, which should both be remembered. For the relatives of RAF aircrew, each loss was heralded by a telegram strewn with the tears of those reading the words, "failed to return." Medals like the VC could never return those men to those who wept for their loss, nor could they make sense of the conflict in which they had lost their lives. Today, we still try to make sense of the war, but aircraft like the ferry battle and the crews that flew them are not often the first thought when it comes to mind for most when remembering the Second World War or even the RAF's bombing war. When the events of May 1940 are remembered or retold, the ferry battle can frequently be dismissed, its efforts viewed as pointless sacrifice. The failings of the battle, in the role it served in May 1940, and the faults of the RAF's approach and doctrine in using aircraft in ground attack roles during this period are evidenced by the high casualty figures of the AASF. The bravery, resolve and courage of the young airmen who flew the ferry battle is irrefutable, and this is what Gray and Garland's VC represents.
Wow, what a fantastic story. Incredibly moving, and I suspect one which many of our listeners won't be aware of. So that concludes our first VC special pod episode. Our next VC story involves bombers from 5 Group Bomber Command flying from RAF Scampton at night at low level over water, dropping special ordnances in a mission that sees the bombers flying deep into Germany. No, it isn't that raid from May 1943, but one in August 1940. And our attention will be focused on Roderick Babe Leroyd and 49 Squadron during the Battle of the Barges and the Battle of Britain. If you don't already, please do give us a follow on social media. The links are in the show notes. There are also links to our Facebook group where there are regular discussions with like-minded people. Please don't forget to leave us a review or rating wherever you get your podcasts. It really does make a massive difference to us. And if you would like to help us produce more great content, please do hit that subscribe button. Again, this is in the show notes. You can subscribe from just £2.60 a month, and it's your support that keeps this pod going. So a massive thank you to our current monthly subscribers, and do consider signing up if you haven't already. So James and I will see you all again next week. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.